All right, in this video, we're going to cover lesson 2 of our stressed series. Now, this is sort of interestingly ironic that I carry all my stress in my shoulders and my neck, and right now my neck is killing me. So if I look a little bit stiff, it is because I'm stressed, and that actually relates a little bit to today's message. The title of the message is Hectic Stress. And we're going to be talking about being pulled in 1,000 directions. Now, don't forget, we're going to cover, next week we'll cover relational stress. And then in the last week, we'll cover something called future stress. So try to be aware of where we're heading so you don't overlap too much when you cover this. But, we talked last week about the fact that stress has pros and cons, but we can grow from it if we learn to, depend upon God. That's kind of a theme that runs throughout this entire series. And we're going to talk specifically about hectic stress, which is the kind that makes you feel pulled in 1,000 directions. So whether you're preaching this or presenting this in a small group, I'm sure you have a couple of examples of feeling pulled in 1,000 directions. I give 2 examples: hectic schedules, and then that make you feel overwhelmed. A lot of people, I think, will relate to that. And then hectic finances that, just paralyze you because you've got all these bills piling up. So the first talking point is real simple. The stuff that makes you hectic is the stuff that you really care about. And this is kind of one of those deep thoughts, like just to get people to acknowledge that, to realize that, well, yeah, man, if I write out, and I encourage you to do that, encourage people to think about it in their heads on Sunday morning or in a small group, maybe even just give people a minute to write those things out. If they're on your list, you probably care about them in some cases more than you're willing to admit. I think that's helpful for people to realize. Now, the passage that we're anchoring this whole message in is Matthew 11, and the whole idea of coming to Jesus, and where he says, "Take my yoke upon you." And so it's this whole thing of taking on Jesus's yoke. But the question we're really answering with the sermon is, well, what does it mean to take on Christ's yoke? And we're focusing on 3 things. Okay, so the first thing is it means that we take on a new identity. Okay, so that means kind of the idea here is we're released from the rat race of expectations and the baggage that comes from trying to measure up. And so, the idea that a lot of times a lot of the stress that we feel is related to this idea of insecurity. In fact, I encourage you to check out this video, The Single Thing That Defines Us, and that's actually the bonus video this week. I'll scroll down here for that. Or it's actually the See Also video, Where Do You Find Your Identity? Just to get people to realize that's related to stress, because a lot of times our schedules and our finances, the reason we fill those things up is because of an identity issue. I know, again, it's kind of a deeper thing, so keep it, depending on your audience, keep that, don't get too deep on that, but it's worth giving that some thought. So the second thing then, after we take on a new identity, is we take on a new perspective. When Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you," he said, "Let me teach you." So when we take on Jesus's yoke, then that means we let go of what we think is important. To kind of go back to the first talking point, when we take on Jesus's yoke, think of that as we're taking on his priorities, we're taking on his perspective. We're gonna start pulling the things that matter to him, not the things that matter to us. Now, it's not everything that people have on their list is bad, but a lot of that stuff is just not ultimate, right? And so the good question is, are you carrying around baggage that is only stressing you out, but it's not ultimately valuable? That's kind of the point of taking on a new perspective. And then the third thing that passage is saying is that we take on what I call a pulling partner. Okay, so the idea here is that oxen pulled their loads in pairs. And so there was a strong ox and a weak ox. And obviously, Jesus is the strong ox, we're the weak ox. And so he's the one helping us pull the load. It's his load in the first place, but we're pulling it with his strength and with his help. Now, I'm going to close my message with this last little thing, which is to say, well, what are some of the things that really matter to Jesus then? So what is the load that he wants us to pull? And one thing I say to get specific, because it comes from the context of Matthew 11, is that Jesus was really teaching his disciples in the context of sending them out to go make disciples. And so don't forget that the greatest thing you can do as a Christian is to help someone pursue God. If that's not on your priority list, then you've got to reevaluate your priorities. He wants us to bear fruit. If we remain in him, like in his yoke, then we'll produce fruit. And if we don't, then we're not going to do anything with our life, and our hectic schedules and finances and everything, it's just going to be pointless at the end of the day. So I hope that's helpful in your preparation, either to preach this sermon or to lead your small group through this material. And don't forget, view the links below if you want to see our sermon notes or our manuscript, or if you want to share any of your thoughts or ideas or your manuscript, any kind of content that you think might help the rest of the community who's going to be preaching this sermon. And I hope, once again, that this helps relieve a little bit of your stress as you prep this sermon and preach it or share it in your small groups this week.